What if I told you that before Yahweh, the God of the Bible, there were black gods? What if the very essence of the divine was something radically different from what you've been taught? For millennia, history has buried these truths deep beneath the surface. It's as if someone wanted us to forget the gods who walked before Yahweh, the gods of ancient civilizations, rich with color and power, embodying the very forces of creation, justice, and rebirth. These weren't mere myths, but living spirits that once reigned in the hearts of the people. Have you ever wondered why these gods were erased from the historical narrative? Why, in the rise of monotheism, the divine became so singular? What did we lose when these gods were labeled as dark or evil, banished to the shadows of forgotten history? Was it about faith, or was it about control? In this journey, we're going to uncover the hidden gods of ancient Africa, gods who existed long before the dawn of Yahweh's reign. Together, we'll discover how these black gods were systematically wiped away, replaced by a single conquering force. We'll explore why this shift wasn't just spiritual, but political. We'll also take a hard look at how the image of a white Yahweh took hold in the Western world, and how this continues to impact our understanding of race and divinity. In this video, you'll come face to face with the erased gods, the ones whose names have been whispered in ancient tongues. By the end, you'll see how these hidden truths shape our spiritual legacy today. And perhaps, just maybe, you'll find yourself questioning what you've always known about God. Stay with me, because what we're about to uncover will change everything. Will you dare to confront the untold stories of the gods who once ruled the heavens and the earth? Let's find out together. Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us on this journey to rediscover the divine power that has been silenced for too long. Before Yahweh, the God we know from the Bible, there were black gods. These gods were worshipped in ancient civilizations long before the arrival of monotheism, before the rise of the singular, all-encompassing deity that became the foundation of much of today's religious world. For centuries, this rich spiritual history has been hidden, erased, or relegated to the margins. But what if I told you that these gods were not mere myth, not the fantasies of ancient peoples, but actual deities who governed creation, justice, and rebirth, powerful beings who held dominion over the natural and spiritual worlds? As we peel back the layers of time, we begin to see the stories that have been swept away by history's tides. These gods, often portrayed with black features, were once the cornerstones of their people's spirituality. They were living, breathing forces of nature, believed to be present in every moment, shaping the lives of those who worshipped them. These gods weren't foreign entities. They were a reflection of the very essence of creation, the divine presence felt in the rhythm of the earth, in the movement of the stars, in the love between people. But somewhere along the way, these gods were replaced, forgotten, or even condemned. In this journey, we'll trace the origins of these forgotten deities. We'll visit ancient Egypt, Nubia, and Kush, where the divine was often represented by gods who were not just human-like figures, but forces of nature that embodied life itself. Take, for instance, the ancient Egyptian gods like Ra and Osiris, who were intricately woven into the fabric of Egyptian society. Ra, the sun god, was the symbol of creation, giving life and light to the world. His followers saw him as the origin of all things, a force that embodied both divine justice and mercy. Osiris, god of the afterlife, brought with him the hope of resurrection, of rebirth from death, a powerful symbol of spiritual renewal. These deities were not just spiritual entities, but symbols of life's cyclical nature, of death and rebirth, teaching us that through trials and hardship, we can always rise again. But as monotheism began to take root, particularly in the lands of Israel, something changed. Gods like Ra, Osiris, and their kin were no longer the center of worship. They were pushed aside, their temples dismantled, their names erased from the holy texts that would come to dominate the region. Why? Because the rise of monotheism brought with it not just a change in spiritual beliefs, but a shift in power. The concept of one God, Yahweh, became the defining spiritual force. But this shift wasn't just a matter of religious belief. It was a strategic political move that sought to control not only the spiritual lives of people, but also their societal structures. The idea of multiple gods, especially those that were closely tied to the land and the people's heritage, was a threat to the new monotheistic order. The transition from polytheism to monotheism wasn't a smooth one. It was marked by resistance, by rebellions, and by fierce ideological battles. The Israelites themselves struggled with the idea of Yahweh as the one true God, often caught between the old gods of their ancestors and the demands of a new, singular deity. In the Bible, we see these struggles reflected in the stories of kings like Josiah, who sought to purge the land of its foreign gods, smashing their idols and destroying their altars. It wasn't just a religious war. It was a fight for identity, for control, and for the future of a people. But in the process, what was lost? What happened to the gods who once ruled the heavens and the earth? What happened to the divine forces that shaped the people's understanding of creation, justice, and renewal? In many ways, the erasure of these black gods is more than just a theological shift. It's a cultural and spiritual displacement. By replacing these gods with a single, often whitewashed image of Yahweh, the divine became something foreign to the very people who had worshipped these black gods for centuries. The question then becomes, what does this loss of connection to our spiritual ancestors mean for us today? The whitewashing of Yahweh and the portrayal of Jesus as a white figure are not just historical accidents. They are deliberate cultural shifts designed to align the divine with the political and social structures of the time. The rise of Western Christianity, with its emphasis on a white European Christ, has shaped much of the global perception of God and spirituality. This shift has profound consequences, especially for black people who, for generations, have been taught to see their divinity as something alien to their own heritage. But the question remains, what happens when we begin to recover these lost gods, these forgotten deities? What does it mean for us spiritually, emotionally, and culturally when we reawaken the gods of our ancestors? What power does it hold to reclaim the divine presence that has been hidden from us? As we move forward, we will explore the evolution of Yahweh, from a local, warlike god to the sole deity worshipped by the Israelites. This transformation, as we will see, wasn't just about theology. It was about establishing control over the people. The shift from henotheism, worshipping one god while acknowledging the existence of others, to monotheism was a significant step in consolidating power and ensuring the loyalty of the people. The influence of prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah was instrumental in this transition, as they preached the importance of worshipping Yahweh alone, pushing aside the old gods and their symbols. This move towards monotheism, however, didn't come without its challenges. Even as the Israelites were called to worship Yahweh alone, many of them continued to hold on to the old ways, the old gods of their ancestors. The prophets fought hard to rid the land of these remnants of polytheism, seeing them as distractions from the one true God. And in this fight, they inadvertently created a division, a split between the old and the new, between what was and what was meant to be. But in the end, what is lost in the process of this religious shift? What happens when we abandon the gods of our ancestors in favor of a new divine figure? In many ways, this question touches on a deeper issue, one of identity, heritage, and connection to the divine. As we move forward in this exploration, we will look more closely at the development of Yahweh's story, his transformation from a tribal god to the supreme deity of monotheism, and the spiritual and cultural consequences of this shift. This journey will not only reveal the power of these black gods, but will also challenge us to consider what we have lost in the name of religious change. What do we reclaim when we look back to our spiritual roots, to the gods who once walked the earth, whose stories are still embedded in the very fabric of our lives? What do we find when we begin to truly listen to the voices of the past and to the gods who once spoke to us in the language of the earth, the sky, and the sea? Yahweh, the God who would come to dominate the religious landscape of Israel, is not just a singular divine being. He has been shaped by centuries of change, transformation, and adaptation. Yet there is an unsettling reality we must confront. The image of Yahweh as we know him today, whitened, distilled, and reformed, was not always the image the ancient Israelites held. This shift was not just theological, it was cultural and political, meant to establish a new order that would govern the people both spiritually and socially. It is essential to understand how this image of Yahweh, increasingly divorced from his ancient roots, was presented in a way that served the interests of the powers that be, influencing generations of believers. The idea of a white Yahweh did not simply arise from historical accidents. It was the result of a deliberate process over time, particularly after the spread of Christianity in the West. Through the lens of European imperialism, the face of God became whitened, purified to fit the colonial narrative that sought to define both the divine and humanity through a Eurocentric perspective. The powerful legacy of this shift can be seen in the art and iconography that flourished during the Renaissance and beyond, where Jesus and Yahweh were often depicted as white, blonde-haired, and blue-eyed, an image far removed from the realities of the ancient Near East. But why does this matter? It's more than an issue of representation. It's about the power dynamics embedded in religious imagery and the societal structures that these images perpetuated. When the divine was portrayed as white, it subtly reinforced the message that the divine order, the true authoritative order, was aligned with the powers of the West. It normalized the idea that those who were white, who were European, were closest to God. It created a disconnect, especially for black people, who were not just alienated from the divine in the imagery they saw, but were also often taught that their heritage, their ancestral gods, were inferior, that they were pagan, and that to truly worship God, they had to adopt a foreign identity. This has had a deep psychological and spiritual impact, not just on black communities, but on the broader Christian world. It has perpetuated a system where divinity was viewed as something distant and removed from the everyday experiences of people of color. It has fostered a spiritual divide, one that has made it harder for many to connect with the divine in a deeply personal way. Yet, in the midst of this struggle, there is a path to healing. Recognizing the role that these images have played in shaping our view of God allows us to reclaim a more authentic understanding of divinity. By revisiting the ancient deities, especially those of Africa and the Middle East, we can begin to heal the wounds created by centuries of spiritual erasure. These black gods, who once held dominion over the land, are not just relics of the past. They are part of the living tradition, reminders of a spiritual connection that transcends time and space. They embody a power that is not tied to a particular race or place, but to the very essence of creation itself. As we begin to reclaim these lost gods, we also begin to reclaim ourselves. The journey to rediscover these ancient deities is a journey to reconnect with the divine within us, to break free from the chains of a narrative that has told us that we are lesser, that we are disconnected from God. By reimagining God through the lens of these black gods, we open ourselves to a more expansive understanding of the divine. We begin to see God not as a distant, otherworldly figure, but as a presence that is intimately connected with us, with the earth, and with the world around us. This reimagining brings healing, for it allows us to see that we are not disconnected from the divine, but are, in fact, a reflection of the divine power that created us. Now, we must turn our focus to the evolution of Yahweh. The God of Israel, in his earliest form, was not the all-powerful singular deity that we know today. In fact, Yahweh was once one of many gods, worshipped alongside a host of other deities. One of the most significant aspects of Yahweh's evolution is the relationship he once shared with the goddess Asherah. Archaeological evidence has shown that early Israelites believed in Yahweh and Asherah as a divine pair, much like many other ancient cultures had a pantheon of gods and goddesses. Asherah, often depicted as a mother goddess, was the symbol of fertility, life, and renewal. She was considered the consort of Yahweh, and together they represented a balanced and harmonious divine order. But as monotheism began to take root in Israel, a dramatic shift occurred. The once coexistent worship of Yahweh and Asherah was gradually replaced by the worship of Yahweh alone. This transition wasn't merely theological, it was deeply political. In a world where kings and priests sought to consolidate power, the idea of a single, all-powerful God was far more effective at uniting people under a single banner. This move from henotheism, worshipping one God while acknowledging the existence of others, to strict monotheism was not just a spiritual decision. It was a social and political maneuver aimed at creating a unified nation under the sovereignty of one God. This transformation, however, came at a cost. As the worship of Asherah faded, so too did a divine feminine energy that had once played a central role in Israelite spirituality. The rise of Yahweh as the sole God left little room for the divine feminine, relegating her to the margins of religious thought. It was a move that not only erased the memory of Asherah, but also diminished the spiritual richness of the faith, turning it into something more rigid and centralized. This loss, though, has not been forgotten. In recent years, there has been a growing movement to reclaim the feminine divine, to reintroduce the balance that was lost when Asherah was removed from the narrative. The process of Yahweh's evolution from a local tribal god to the supreme deity of Israel reflects a larger trend in the development of monotheism. The rise of monotheism in Israel mirrored the rise of centralized hierarchical power structures throughout the ancient world. As Yahweh's dominance grew, so too did the power of those who controlled the worship of Yahweh. The prophets, kings, and priests who promoted Yahweh as the one true God played a pivotal role in this transformation, shaping not just the spiritual landscape of Israel, but also its social and political structures. In the broader context of the ancient world, the rise of monotheism in Israel can be seen as part of a larger trend toward religious centralization and state control. The spread of monotheism was not just about religious purity, but about consolidating power and authority. Monotheism provided a framework for the rulers to exert greater control over their subjects, ensuring that all loyalty was directed toward the one true God, and by extension, toward the rulers who were believed to be the earthly representatives of that God. The development of Yahweh into a singular, all-powerful deity was not a gradual, natural process. It was the result of intense political, social, and religious struggle. And while this transformation allowed for the rise of a unified Israelite state, it also erased much of the spiritual richness that had once been part of Israel's heritage. But in reclaiming the lost gods, in returning to the roots of our spiritual ancestors, we begin to restore the balance that was lost. The divine, in all its forms, is a reflection of the many facets of life, both masculine and feminine, both creative and destructive. By embracing the fullness of the divine, we can begin to heal the divisions that have plagued humanity for centuries. This is the power of rediscovering the black gods, the gods of creation, justice, and rebirth. They are not just the gods of the past, but the gods of the future, waiting to help us heal, to reconnect, and to rebuild our relationship with the divine. By returning to these roots, we reclaim not just our spiritual heritage, but our connection to the divine force that flows through all of creation. The rise of monotheism in Israel was not merely a religious evolution. It was a battle for identity and power, a battle that pitted the gods of old against the new, singular vision of Yahweh. This monumental shift was deeply entwined with the political and social climate of the time. The establishment of Yahweh as the sole God was not a passive process. It was actively forged by kings, prophets, and religious reformers who sought to reshape the spiritual landscape of their people. But as the divine was transformed into a singular, unified force, what was lost in the process? The answer lies in understanding the power struggle that unfolded between the polytheistic traditions of the ancient world and the rise of monotheism. In the ancient world, gods were not just spiritual beings, they were intertwined with the very fabric of society. They shaped the laws, the customs, and the identity of the people. The gods of Egypt, Nubia, and Canaan were not abstract concepts. They were real, living forces that embodied the essence of creation and life itself. Ra, Osiris, and Asherah were not merely symbols. They were gods who represented the forces of life, death, and renewal. These deities were deeply connected to the earth, to the people, and to the cycles of nature. Their worship was not just about spiritual devotion. It was about survival, about understanding the rhythms of the natural world, and about honoring the divine presence that existed in all things. However, as the Israelites embraced the idea of a singular, all-powerful Yahweh, they began to distance themselves from these ancient gods. The rise of monotheism meant that all other gods had to be rejected, dismissed as false idols. This shift wasn't just theological, it was about defining who the Israelites were and where they stood in relation to the rest of the ancient world. The embrace of Yahweh as the one true God was a bold statement. It was a declaration of independence, a rejection of the old ways that had bound them to the ancient traditions of Egypt, Canaan, and Mesopotamia. But this transformation came with a heavy price. The gods of the ancient world were not just rejected, they were erased. The rich tapestry of polytheistic belief that had shaped the cultural and spiritual life of Israel for centuries was torn apart, and in its place a new vision of the divine was constructed, one that was centralized, one-dimensional, and often divorced from the reality of the natural world. Yahweh, once a tribal god, became the sole ruler of the heavens and the earth, and with him the gods of the past were relegated to the shadows. This shift in religious thinking had far-reaching consequences, not just for Israel, but for the entire ancient world. As the belief in a single God spread throughout the region, it began to challenge the old ways of understanding the divine. The great pantheons of gods, gods who represented the forces of nature, the heavens and the earth, were displaced in favor of a singular, omnipotent deity. The old gods were pushed to the margins, their worship suppressed or destroyed. And as a result, the people who had once lived in harmony with these gods were also pushed to the margins, forced to adopt a new way of understanding the divine, one that was often foreign and disconnected from their roots. The shift from polytheism to monotheism was not just a change in religious thought, it was a social and political revolution. Monotheism gave the rulers of Israel, and later the rulers of other monotheistic societies, a powerful tool for control. By centralizing worship around a single deity, the rulers could establish a stronger sense of unity and loyalty among their people. Yahweh, as the sole God, became a symbol of national identity, and his worship became the foundation of political power. The shift to monotheism was not merely about religious purity, it was about establishing a new social order, one that would place the king or ruler at the center of society as the representative of Yahweh on earth. However, this shift also had unintended consequences. As the divine became increasingly abstract, disconnected from the tangible world, the people lost their direct connection to the forces of nature and the earth. The gods of the past, who had represented the cycles of life, death, and rebirth, were replaced by a God who was more distant, more transcendent. Yahweh, once a god of war and struggle, became a god of purity and holiness, and in this transformation, the divine feminine energy, embodied by goddesses like Asherah, was erased. The world that had once been inhabited by gods, who represented both masculine and feminine aspects of creation, was now dominated by a single male god. In reclaiming the ancient gods of the past, we not only reclaim a lost connection to the divine, but we also open ourselves up to a more balanced understanding of spirituality. The gods of Egypt, Nubia, and Kush were not simply the products of ancient myth. They were reflections of the divine forces that shaped the world around them. These gods were not just gods of the past, they were symbols of the eternal truths that continue to guide us today. In reclaiming them, we can rediscover the balance that was lost with the rise of monotheism and re-establish a deeper connection to the divine forces that govern our lives. The process of reclaiming these gods is not just about rediscovering ancient beliefs. It's about healing the wounds that were created by centuries of spiritual disconnection. For many people, the rejection of these gods has led to a sense of spiritual emptiness, a feeling of being disconnected from the divine. By reintroducing these gods into our spiritual consciousness, we can begin to heal the wounds of the past and restore a sense of wholeness to our understanding of the divine. The recovery of the divine feminine, symbolized by goddesses like Asherah, is particularly important. The rise of Yahweh as the sole God of Israel led to the suppression of the feminine divine, relegating it to the margins of religious thought. But the divine feminine is an essential part of the spiritual balance of the universe. By reclaiming the feminine aspect of the divine, we can restore a sense of harmony and balance to our understanding of spirituality. In many ways, the reclaiming of these ancient gods is an act of spiritual liberation. It is a rejection of the narrow, exclusive vision of the divine that has dominated much of Western religious thought. By returning to the gods of our ancestors, we can reconnect with the forces of creation and renewal that are still present in our lives today. These gods are not just the gods of the past, they are the gods of the future, waiting to guide us as we move forward on our spiritual journey. The rise of monotheism in Israel marked a pivotal moment in the history of religion, but it also marked the beginning of a process of spiritual disconnection. The gods of the past, once revered and worshipped, were erased from the spiritual consciousness of the people. But as we reclaim these gods, as we rediscover the divine forces that once governed the earth, we begin to heal the wounds created by this disconnection. The gods of Egypt, Nubia, and Kush are not just ancient myths, they are powerful spiritual forces that continue to shape our lives today. And by reconnecting with them, we can restore a sense of balance, harmony, and divine presence to our spiritual lives. As we move forward in this journey of rediscovery, we are reminded that the divine is not confined to one culture, one religion, or one set of beliefs. The divine is vast, encompassing all the forces of creation, all the aspects of life, death, and rebirth. By opening ourselves to the gods of the past, we can expand our understanding of the divine and deepen our connection to the spiritual forces that shape our lives. As we journeyed through the profound history of the divine, uncovering truths hidden beneath the layers of time and tradition, we've come to realize that the divine is not bound by a singular image or representation. It is vast, encompassing, and ever-present, a force that transcends time, culture, and race. The gods of the past, especially those of black ancestry, have been silenced and erased, but they are still with us, waiting to be remembered, embraced, and honored. We have touched on the transformation of Yahweh, how the image of God shifted, and the deep spiritual cost of that shift. Yet in this exploration, there is something that stirs in our souls, something that calls us back to our roots, to the deep connection with the divine that has always been within us, waiting to be awakened. Perhaps, for some of us, this message brings a sense of clarity. Perhaps it opens the doors to a deeper understanding of God and ourselves. The divine is not just found in the pages of holy books. It is embedded in the very fabric of life itself, woven through the ancient gods of Egypt, Nubia, Kush, and beyond. They were not just symbols or distant figures. They were the embodiment of life, creation, justice, and rebirth. And as we reclaim these ancient divine beings, we are also reclaiming parts of ourselves that were lost or forgotten, parts that can heal, uplift, and restore our spirits to their true, divine nature. I hope that this journey through the past, the reclaiming of lost truths, has sparked something within you. Perhaps you now see God not as a distant figure, but as an intimate living force that resides in the very breath of life, in the earth beneath your feet, and in the very air you breathe. The journey to rediscover the ancient black gods is not just a historical quest, it is a spiritual awakening, a return to a fullness that can guide us in times of darkness and light. If this video has brought a sense of healing, a moment of reflection, or even a spark of curiosity within your soul, I invite you to share that energy. It's through these moments of connection that we grow, that we begin to rebuild what was lost. If you feel that this video has brought value to your spirit, or if it has helped you find light in a time of darkness, I ask for your support in a way that feels right for you. Every gesture of encouragement, no matter how small, helps keep this journey alive. Your likes, your shares, your comments, they are the energy that fuels this work, that sustains it, and pushes it forward into the world. Your engagement is not just appreciated, it's what makes this community stronger. It's what allows us to keep telling these stories, exploring these truths, and sharing this light with others. And if this message has touched your heart, I invite you to subscribe and join this family of seekers, of truth bearers, of those who desire to reclaim the divine power that resides within us all. As we close, let this message linger in your heart. The divine is not just a figure of the past. It is alive, living within you, breathing through you, guiding you through every moment. Let us walk forward together, reconnecting with the gods who have always been with us. Let us heal, grow, and rise again, remembering the divine that exists within and all around us. I thank you from the depth of my heart for being here, for taking this journey with me, and for sharing in this awakening. Your presence here means more than words can express, and I am grateful for every soul that connects to this message. May the divine light continue to guide you, today and always.